If I die before sunrise, you must promise me one thing. The woman's voice was barely louder than the wind scraping across the prairie, yet it stopped Wyatt Mercer in his tracks. The lantern hanging from his porch beam swayed gently, casting long shadows over the lonely ranch that sat nearly 40 miles from the nearest town. For 12 years, nothing much had changed out here. The cattle grazed. The seasons passed. The silence stayed. But on this cold autumn night, silence had arrived carrying 2 children and a secret. Wyatt stood beneath the porch roof, one hand resting against a weathered post, studying the stranger who had appeared out of the darkness. She sat near the edge of his yard beside a small campfire, wrapped in a worn blanket. Her dark hair stirred in the wind. 2 children slept beside her, curled together beneath another blanket, their faces peaceful despite the long road that clearly lay behind them. And between the woman and the children rested a small leather bag. It wasn't large. Barely big enough to hold a few personal belongings. Yet every few moments her eyes drifted back to it, as though it mattered more than anything else in the world. Wyatt had noticed something else. Whenever the firelight touched the bag, there came the faintest metallic sound from inside. A soft clink. Almost like hidden silver. Why would I promise that? Wyatt finally asked. The woman lifted tired eyes toward him. In the orange glow, she looked older than she probably was. Exhaustion had a way of adding years to a person's face. Because there are men looking for it, she said quietly. And if they find me before dawn, they will ask questions. Another gust swept across the open land. Somewhere beyond the corrals, a horse shifted its weight and snorted into the darkness. Wyatt looked toward the sleeping children. The little boy clutched a carved wooden horse in one hand. The older girl slept lightly, one arm stretched protectively toward her younger brother even in her dreams. Something about that sight unsettled him. Families didn't wander the frontier at midnight unless something had gone terribly wrong. "What's in the bag?" he asked. The woman lowered her gaze. "Something people value more than human lives." Wyatt frowned. The answer only deepened the mystery. He walked closer to the fire, boots crunching softly against dry earth. The scent of wood smoke mixed with approaching rain. Storm clouds gathered somewhere beyond the hills. The woman noticed him glance toward the bag again. Her hand immediately moved over it. Protective. Fearful. Certain. "You must not open it," she whispered. "Not tonight." Wyatt stared at her for several long seconds. Then he looked at the children once more. The little girl suddenly stirred. Her eyes opened halfway. For a moment she seemed confused about where she was. Then she reached toward the woman and quietly asked, "Mama?" The woman smiled. It was the first smile Wyatt had seen all night, and somehow it looked heartbreaking. She brushed a hand gently through the girl's hair. "Go back to sleep, Nita." The child nodded and settled again. Wyatt noticed the woman's eyes glisten briefly in the firelight. As though she were trying to memorize every detail. Every breath. Every second. And for reasons he couldn't explain, a cold feeling settled deep inside his chest. Because it looked less like a mother watching her children sleep, and more like someone saying goodbye. Wyatt did not sleep that night. The storm arrived sometime after midnight, rolling across the prairie in slow waves of distant thunder. Rain tapped against the ranch house roof while the fire outside dwindled into glowing embers. From the window near his kitchen table, he watched the woman remain awake long after the children had fallen asleep. She never left the leather bag. Not once. Every time her eyes drifted closed, they opened again a few seconds later, searching the darkness beyond the fences as though she expected someone to emerge from it. By dawn, the rain had passed. A pale gray sky stretched across the horizon. Wyatt stepped outside carrying a coffee cup and found the woman standing near the corral. The children were still sleeping beneath their blanket. The morning wind tugged gently at her hair as she stared east toward the distant hills. You should rest, Wyatt said. She shook her head. I rested 3 days ago. Something about the answer made him pause. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't sarcasm. It sounded like simple truth. The kind spoken by someone who had spent too long surviving. Wyatt handed her the cup. She hesitated before accepting it. Warm steam rose between them. For a moment neither spoke. Then the little boy appeared in the doorway of the barn where he had wandered after waking. His carved horse still occupied one hand. Mama, he called. Look. He proudly held up a smooth white stone. A treasure discovered near the water trough. The woman smiled again. Softer this time. Real. That's a good one, Taza. The boy grinned and hurried back toward his sister, who was now examining the stone as if it were worth a fortune. Wyatt watched the children for several moments. They laughed easily. They seemed healthy. Yet their boots were worn thin. Their blankets carried months of dust. Whatever journey had brought them here had not been short. Where are you trying to go? He finally asked. The woman's smile faded. She looked toward the children before answering. Away. Wyatt exhaled through his nose. That's not a place. Sometimes it's the only place left. The words lingered between them. A hawk circled high above the prairie. Somewhere beyond the hills a train whistle echoed faintly through the morning air. The woman reached into her pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. She stared at it for several seconds before handing it to Wyatt. It wasn't a letter. It was a map. Old. Carefully drawn by hand. Several locations had been marked with faded ink. One of them sat nearly 100 miles north of his ranch. Another had been crossed out completely. What am I looking at? Wyatt asked. The reason we're still alive. Before he could ask another question, Nita suddenly called out from beside the barn. Her voice carried a sharp edge he hadn't heard before. Wyatt turned. The girl stood frozen near the fence line. Her eyes were fixed on the dirt road leading toward the property. Wyatt followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed it. Fresh wagon tracks. Deep ones. Not from the storm. Not from yesterday. Tracks that had appeared during the night. And they stopped less than 50 yards from his ranch before turning back the way they came. The woman's face drained of color. Her hand tightened around the leather bag. They found us, she whispered. And now they know exactly where we are. Wyatt studied the wagon tracks for a long moment, then did something that surprised even himself. Instead of saddling a horse and searching for whoever had left them, he erased the tracks. Using a rake and the heels of his boots, he worked methodically until the marks vanished into the damp earth. Aiyana watched silently. She seemed confused at first. Then she understood. Whoever had come during the night wanted her to panic. They wanted her to run. Wyatt was refusing to play their game. By late morning, the ranch looked as though nobody had visited at all. The children helped feed the chickens. Taza chased grasshoppers near the barn. Nita sat quietly beneath a cottonwood tree, turning the smooth white stone over in her hands. Everything appeared normal. That was exactly how Wyatt wanted it. Near noon, a lone wagon appeared on the distant road. It rolled slowly across the prairie, carrying only one passenger. No armed men. No threatening figures. Just an older gentleman in a dark coat and a neatly pressed vest. The wagon stopped beside the ranch gate. The man climbed down carefully and removed his hat. His silver hair caught the sunlight. He looked more like a banker than a traveler. Good afternoon, he called politely. My name is Amos Whitaker. Wyatt stepped forward but remained between the visitor and the house. Amos smiled warmly. The kind of smile that usually put people at ease. I am sorry to bother you, Mr. Mercer. I am looking for a family that may have passed through this area. Wyatt kept his face expressionless. Lots of people pass through. Amos nodded as though he appreciated the answer. His eyes drifted casually across the property. The barn. The corral. The water trough. Then they landed briefly on Nita. Just for a second. But Wyatt noticed. So did Aiyana. The color left her face immediately. Amos looked away as if nothing had happened. A mother and 2 children, he continued. There are people in town worried about their safety. The words sounded kind. The timing did not. Nobody could have reached town and returned this quickly unless someone had known exactly where to look. Wyatt felt a quiet alarm settle inside him. The tracks. The visit. This man. They were connected. Haven't seen them, Wyatt said. Amos studied him for a moment. Then he laughed softly. You have always been difficult to read, Mr. Mercer. That sentence stopped Wyatt cold. He had never met Amos Whitaker before. Or at least he did not think he had. Amos seemed to realize what he had revealed. The smile never left his face, but something changed behind his eyes. Something careful. Something calculating. Enjoy your afternoon, he said. If you happen to see that family, tell them there are people who wish to help. Then he climbed back into the wagon and departed. The ranch remained silent long after he disappeared beyond the hills. Finally, Nita approached. She looked toward the road where Amos had vanished. Mama, she whispered. That man has the same symbol. Aiyana froze. What symbol? Nita pointed toward the folded map sticking from Aiyana's pocket. The one on your paper. It was on his watch. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, genuine fear appeared in Aiyana's eyes. Not fear of pursuit. Not fear of discovery. Fear of recognition. Wyatt looked from the map to the empty road. The conflict had changed. This was no longer about hiding from strangers. Someone respectable. Someone powerful. Someone connected to whatever secret lay behind that map had just stepped onto his land. And now Wyatt understood something important. The people searching for Aiyana did not need to force doors open. They already had influence, money, and patience. Which meant the most dangerous battle ahead would not be fought on the prairie. It would be fought against people who smiled while hiding the truth. The sun was sinking behind the western ridge when Aiyana finally unfolded the map completely. Until now, she had guarded it more carefully than the leather bag itself. The paper crackled softly in the evening breeze as Wyatt studied the faded markings spread across his kitchen table. Nita sat beside him. Taza leaned against the wall, half asleep after a long day. The ranch house smelled of coffee, old pine boards, and the stew simmering slowly on the stove. Outside, cattle moved quietly across the pasture. Everything felt ordinary. Yet nothing was ordinary anymore. Wyatt traced one finger across a circle drawn near the northern edge of the map. What is this place? He asked. Aiyana hesitated. Then she answered. A school. Wyatt looked up. That was not the answer he expected. Nita looked equally confused. A school, she repeated. Aiyana nodded slowly. Years ago, before most people living today were born, a group of Apache families and several settlers built something together. They believed children should learn from one another instead of fearing one another. The room grew quiet. Even Taza opened his eyes. What happened to it? Wyatt asked. A shadow crossed Aiyana's face. People stopped believing. The answer lingered heavily between them. Wyatt studied the map again. Suddenly the symbols seemed different. He had expected hidden mines, lost gold, land claims, something worth money. Instead he found names. Family names. Dates. Notes written carefully along old trails. Records. Histories. Proof that communities once cooperated long before powerful men learned to profit from division. Amos wants this, Wyatt said quietly. Not because it is valuable. Because it is dangerous. Aiyana met his gaze. For the first time, she did not look frightened. She looked tired. Dangerous to people who built their fortunes pretending that history never happened. Nita stared at the map. Her eyes moved across the faded writing until they stopped at a familiar symbol. The same symbol she had seen on Amos Whitaker's watch. He belongs to them, she whispered. Nobody answered because nobody needed to. Just then a knock sounded at the front door. 3 sharp taps. Every head turned. Wyatt rose slowly and stepped outside. The evening air felt cool against his face. Standing on the porch was the town postmaster holding a small canvas mail sack. Message for you, Wyatt. The man handed over a folded envelope and tipped his hat before returning to his wagon. Wyatt opened the letter immediately. There were only 2 sentences written in neat handwriting. We know the children are safe. Bring the map to town on Saturday, and no more questions will be asked. Wyatt read it twice. Then a third time. What unsettled him was not the threat. There was none. No demands. No mention of consequences. Only confidence. The confidence of people accustomed to getting their way. Back inside, Aiyana read the note and closed her eyes. That is what they do, she said quietly. They never push. They wait until everyone else moves. Wyatt stared toward the darkening window. The conflict had changed once again. No riders were coming. No chase was unfolding across the prairie. Instead an invitation had arrived. Polite. Civilized. Respectable. And somehow it felt far more dangerous than anything he had imagined. Then Nita pointed toward the bottom corner of the map. Hidden beneath a fold was a line of writing none of them had noticed before. Wyatt carefully unfolded the paper farther. The words were faded but readable. Beneath the names and symbols appeared a single sentence. The final witness lives in Dry Creek. And according to the date beside it, that witness might still be alive. The next morning arrived clear and bright, but Wyatt Mercer felt no comfort in the sunlight. The sentence hidden at the bottom of the map had changed everything. Until yesterday, he believed the answers were waiting somewhere far away. Now he suspected someone wanted him to believe exactly that. He folded the map carefully and placed it back on the table. Aiyana watched him from across the room. We should leave for Dry Creek, she said. Wyatt shook his head. That is what they expect. Aiyana frowned. The witness may be our only chance. Or a trail left for us to follow. The words settled heavily in the room. Nita listened quietly from her chair near the window. She had stopped thinking like a child 2 days ago. Every conversation seemed to reveal another secret. Every answer created 2 new questions. Taza sat on the floor carving tiny lines into his wooden horse with a dull pocketknife Wyatt had given him. Outside, a wagon approached the ranch. Then. Another. Wyatt stepped onto the porch and stared in surprise. By noon, 3 different neighbors had visited. One brought fresh apples. Another offered to help repair a section of fencing. A third delivered a sack of flour and refused payment. None of them mentioned Aiyana. None of them mentioned the map. Yet something felt wrong. Wyatt had lived alone for years. Most months, nobody visited at all. Suddenly the entire county seemed interested in his well-being. By afternoon, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Friendly smiles. Casual conversations. Unexpected generosity. Everywhere Wyatt looked, people were being kind. Too kind. That evening he rode into town for supplies. The main street bustled with activity. Children ran between storefronts. Merchants greeted him by name. The hotel owner invited him to a community supper scheduled for Saturday night. The same Saturday mentioned in Amos Whitaker's letter. Wyatt slowed his horse. A strange feeling settled over him. He realized nobody was threatening him. Nobody was pressuring him. The town was doing something far more effective. It was reminding him that he belonged there. On his way home, he stopped beside the small church near the edge of town. An elderly woman sat alone on a bench outside. Her name was Martha Grayson. She had taught half the county's children to read. Wyatt respected her. "You look troubled," she said without looking up. Wyatt sat beside her. "Do you ever wonder if some truths are better left buried?" Martha smiled sadly. "Only every day." He glanced toward her. "And what answer did you find?" She folded her hands. "The wrong truth can divide people. The right truth can heal them. The hard part is knowing which one you have." Wyatt rode home carrying those words. Long after dark, he sat alone on the porch. The prairie stretched endlessly beneath the stars. Inside the house, Aiyana and the children slept peacefully. For the first time, Wyatt understood the real pressure facing him. It was not fear. It was responsibility. If the map revealed what Aiyana believed it revealed, the consequences would reach far beyond his ranch. Families. Businesses. Friendships. Entire histories could change. Then he noticed movement near the barn. Nita stood quietly in the moonlight. She approached holding something in her hands. "I found this in the map," she whispered. Wyatt looked down. Hidden between two folds of paper had been a small photograph. Old. Faded. In it stood a young Apache girl beside a young white girl. Both were smiling. On the back someone had written 4 simple words. "Sisters until the end." And beneath the message was a name neither of them had ever seen before. Eleanor Whitaker. On Saturday evening, instead of bringing the map to Amos Whitaker in secret, Wyatt gathered the townspeople inside the church. There, Aiyana revealed the photograph hidden inside the map. The elderly Martha Grayson immediately recognized the young white girl in the picture. "Eleanor Whitaker," she whispered. She was Amos's aunt. The truth finally emerged. Decades earlier, Eleanor Whitaker and Aiyana's Apache grandmother had helped establish the school together. They had called each other sisters. After Eleanor's death, powerful men buried that history and allowed division to replace friendship. Tears filled Amos Whitaker's eyes. He confessed that he had spent years protecting his family's reputation, only to realize he was destroying the very legacy Eleanor had cherished. No lawsuits followed. No revenge came. Instead, the abandoned school was rebuilt. Months later, children from every family learned together once again. And as Wyatt watched Aiyana laughing with Nita and Taza beneath the morning sun, he understood that some truths were never meant to divide people. They were meant to bring them home.